Today, I'm gonna be using water mixable oil paints along with some water mixable medium for the oil paints. Now, I was recommended these and I thought, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and give these a try. So I'm gonna be doing a quick demonstration. I'm gonna be painting Vision from Wanda and Vision. So we're gonna go through that. I'm gonna go through what I like, what I don't like, and how it's used. So you're gonna be able to see it being used in real time. Now, before we get into the video, I'm trying to grow this channel, man. I'm trying to grow it. Let's get to 1,000 subscribers. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I'll give you a minute right now. Now let's get into that video. All right, so let's do a little mini test here. Here I have some swatches I'm gonna do. So we have the water mixable solvent, which is basically the water mixable paint thinner. Now you might be asking, okay, why would I need a water mixable paint thinner if I can thin these out with water? Here's the thing. Water, it doesn't bind the paints as well as if you have some sort of thinner. So if we look at the back here, it tells you all the details as to how it will work. So maintains oily feel and keeps color open longer than water. This is exactly why we would use something like this. Next, we have stand oil, which is water mixable stand oil. So typically when I use stand oil, I use that as maybe my second to last layer, or I use it to fatten up my paints a bit. So we're also going to test this out and see how that works. All right, so just laid down some deep cadmium red hue. And first we're going to try out our thinner. So I just put a little in the cap here. Just going to get it in the brush. I'm just going to spread it a bit. Well, that went a pretty good long way. So there, it still maintains its color, and like it says, it keeps it open longer, which means it will allow you to work with it longer than water because it's not going to evaporate as quick. So next, we're going to try out with just the water and see how that goes. All right, so you see the difference already. With this, it created more like a wash. Created more like a wash with the water. Whereas with the solvent or the thinner, you still get that deep red. So now, let's try out our stand oil. Now, opening this, I can already tell the difference from the traditional stand oil. I'm just gonna pour a bit in the cap here. From the traditional or the regular stand oil that I use, it doesn't have that strong smell like the regular stand oil. You don't have that really caustic smell like the regular stand oil. So that's one of the things why people enjoy water mixable paints, is that it takes that toxicity away a bit. It still contains some of those chemicals, but just not as much. So let's go ahead and test this out. So it's pretty thick there still. Let me get a bit more on the brush. Just taking it in a different direction. So there we have our test run with stand oil. You see how glossy that is. And with any medium, whether it's stand oil or you're using linseed oil, the thing is that it thins out the paint a bit, right? So it did thin out the paint, which you've seen close to the end, but it still carried further along with the thinner or the water mixable solvent. So now this one is just paint, no thinner, no water, no nothing. And that glides along just fine by itself too. But you see it still kept a good nice thickness with it. And if we look back at the water, see it's starting to run and starting to fade out in some areas. whereas the solvent, it's still keeping it pretty together. So one thing with water mixable oil paints, I did do a small test run, like a few sketches. I do not recommend just using water as your medium. It's best to use the stand oil or use the water mixable solvent, or you could just straight up use paint. So I just wanted to show you guys what's going on with this after letting it sit for about half hour. As you see with the water, it evaporated pretty quickly compared to the solvent, where it's still workable. With the stand oil medium, it's still workable. With the paint, it's still workable. That is why you just don't use water alone to do your main washes and to overall be the medium for your pictures when using water mixable oil paints. All right, so let's go ahead and put this to the test. I got a 5x7 panel here, Vision. Now, typically when I do my wash and my underpainting, I use raw umber or burnt umber, but today I'm gonna be using burnt sienna. And the reason for that is just because that's what came in the set. So let's go ahead and get to it. All right, so here we go. This is actually my first serious project using the water mixable oil paints. I have done some work before with it, but they were just paint sketches. This one I'm actually applying some techniques, and I'm using different various brushes that I would typically use in my oil paintings. So I tried some things out, one of them being using the water as a medium, as you see here, but I used it very much to a minimal, or yeah, minimally. And it was hard to get some of the blending down and get some of the paint to move just using the water, which is why I recommend getting the solvent, getting the actual thinner. And once I started incorporating that a bit, it was a lot easier. I pretty much didn't need to use any medium at all when using the paint straight out of the tube. Only when things started to get a little bit thick and it wasn't moving as fluidly. One thing that I gotta say is that you don't want to use straight up water as your medium when using these paints. Another thing too is that the blending, no problem. I was able to get that down. And here I was using some stand oil to get some of these details in. And it was the same technique that I would use when using my regular oil paints. That too it worked just the same, just as easily. Keep in mind, you have to still follow the fat over lean rule when working with water mixable oil paints. In a quick nutshell, that's just working from thinnest to thickest. Now, one thing that I really enjoyed is that instead of having multiple brushes on hand, where I would have to, use one for mid-tones, light tones, and dark tones, with water mixable oil paints, I just was using like 3 brushes, and I just cleaned the brushes out with water, and I was able to go right back. After I did that painting, you're wondering, what's your final thoughts on water mixable oil paints, and would you recommend them? Well, my final thoughts is that I actually do kind of like these. They're not that bad. Compared to traditional oil paints, I'm still gonna go with the traditional oil paints just because I think it has a better feel to it. It spreads a lot better, it blends a lot better. With this, just using the water, it was very difficult to work with. However, when you're using the stand oil or you're using a thinner medium, it does act just like oil paints. I think oil paints also, they're more vibrant in the final look of things, which is these, I don't get that same vibrancy. Now that could just be the brand. I think these are student grade, so it could just be the brand, but I like my traditional oil paints better. One thing that I really did like about this is that I was painting for a while and I didn't get a headache. I didn't start feeling, I don't want to say dizzy, but just kind of out of it. And that's because these have less toxicity than the traditional oil paints. Whereas when I'm using like liquid or the typical stand oil and I'm using my regular oil paints, usually about 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours, I start to get a bit of a headache and I got to either end my session or take a break for a while. So with this, I didn't have any of those problems. So that's one good thing about these that I absolutely like. And that's just because, they're water dilutable, and because the molecules is different than traditional oil paints. So with this, I'm able to go a bit longer without having that effect of sensitivity and having to step away from it. So that's a plus for me. I would recommend these. Go ahead and try them as if I would use them for my main pictures overall or main portraits. No, not right now, but if I did develop an extreme sensitivity to oil paints, this is an awesome option that would still allow me to use oil paints and still allow me to put out the pictures that I want or paintings that I want to put out. And this would be my choice. So I'll catch y'all in the next video. Peace.